Hello, this is Shelley Harrison of Shelley Harrison Healing. And today I am going to be interviewing one of my fabulous clients that I had the great honor to work with through a 6-month pain to purpose journey, 6 months of getting to work with each other once every 2 weeks. This is Rafia Mahli. And Rafia lives nearby to me. She's in Ottawa, Ontario. She is a writer who writes both fiction and nonfiction, poetry and essays. And she is working on a book right now that is about her family. And Rafia is a first generation born in Canada. Her parents came to Canada from the Middle East. And what I got to know about Rafia through working with her is that her homeland still holds like a deep place in her heart and a deep place in her soul. And there's a real calling for her to tell the stories of her people, in particular, the women from her lineages and her cultures, but also that journey of what it's like to stand with one foot in two places. Part of you standing in your homeland and still feeling like your heart and your longing calls you back to where you're from, and yet your life path has also called you to be born in Canada and to live in Canada and to navigate your life here. So welcome, Rafia.
Thank you.
Anything else you want to say about your writing journey, Rafia? You've moved from being an artist. You trained as a fine artist who used to do visual art, sculpture. When did that process for you evolve into writing, evolve into the calling to turn your art into writing?
I'd always been a writer. I started writing when I was a kid, and
Mm.
it was always just something that I did. Um, I'm working on a piece now where I talk about getting a diary when I was about 8 or 9, and that was my first journaling experience.
Mm.
And it just sort of progressed from there. Um, I think because I was such an enthusiastic and avid reader.
Mm.
Writing oftentimes, I think, goes along with that. Um, and somehow I have always had this dual sense of expressing myself in the visual and the written. I've always I remember going to university where I studied art, fine art, and art history, and just feeling split. There would be moments where I was like very visual and the verbal was not accessible, and then I'd flip and I'd be
Mm.
totally into language and expressing myself linguistically, and the visual was kind of out of reach. It was very strange sometimes. But I've always had both. And it's always been a bit of a do I do this or do I do that kind of a tug of war. Um,
Creatively blessed. It comes out your pores one way or the other. You're
yeah,
reminding me that I probably started writing in a diary maybe around the same age, and now have boxes of journals that I've been carrying around for years. And
yeah.
part of me dreads rereading them because my God, what was I going through at that time? And and yeah, I don't, do you ever actually go back to your diaries and journals and pull from that for your writing, or is it really just that was your process of connecting with yourself?
Well, the funny thing is that for the longest time, I had dozens of journals. And then over time, I destroyed most of them.
Hmm.
And really, the thing that started this entire process for me was I discovered that I had one left that I hadn't destroyed.
Oh, wow.
And within it, there was information that kind of exploded my sense of myself. Um, and started this whole process of reevaluating what it was that I was doing with my life and what I wanted to do going forward,
Yeah.
at a very pivotal moment.
All right, so let's talk about that because this is the moment where I got to reconnect with you and start doing this deep dive healing work. But we did work together quite a number of years ago. And so what a delightful surprise for me that I got probably the email where you were like, hey, I think I need to come back. So what was moving in your life that just gave you this inner pull of like, wow, I need some help to sort through this. Like this is, I'm going to need some support, some space holding for what seems to be wanting to unfold in my life at this
Yeah.
moment. And what age are you, Rafia?
So, right now I'm 50.
Oh, yes, right.
When this whole journey began, I had just turned 49. Um,
Yeah.
and I was at a point in life where I was in a job that was not a fit and was very stressful.
Mm,
I, was kind of staring at the next few decades of my life and wondering what it was I wanted to make of them, feeling very dissatisfied with where I had ended up.
mm,
Um, I had I had felt the pull to get back into writing over the course of the pandemic.
mm,
Um, so there were all these things that were just sort of coalescing, and then rediscovering this journal that I had kept in my last year of art college, and some of the things that had I had written about that I had completely buried. I
mm,
It's like it opened up part of my life that I had shut down completely.
mm,
Um, and it felt like understanding what had happened um, at that time in my life and in sort of subsequent years was important to me in terms of bringing myself back into a state of wholeness because I certainly
mm.
did not feel like I was whole.
Wow.
Um,
Ooh, I almost want to pause for a second there, Ravi. I feel very touched. I mean, we spent 6 months working together, and yet at the same time, hearing you talk about, this is just such a it's a deep personal thing, but a deep human thing we can go through, right? Where it's like somehow we reach this age that, sometimes we call midlife crisis. I'm pretty sure when you came to see me, I identified it right away. And I think you follow astrology a little bit too. But in terms of these rites of passage or cycles we go through in our life, and of course, astrology is very, very good at tracking these energetic movements that a human being goes through in the life journey from birth to death. But
mhm,
age 50 is what astrologers call the Chiron return. Chiron is the planet or asteroid that kind of governs our wound and our most difficult, painful things in our life. And it returns to the same position where it was when we were born around age 50. So it can be this real moment of deep reviewing and reconciliation with what is that deepest wound inside of us. Or it sounds like for you, what are the parts that kind of got put away as you were trying to live life, but that part of your soul came calling, right? And on the one hand, through the healing journey, it became this beautiful uprising of this part of you that wanted to come fully into life and contribute to your life path. But sometimes when it's pushing through the surface, it's just creating a lot of turbulence that can feel really, really upsetting and chaotic.
mhm.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of what happened at the time uh, that I had recorded in my journal was the beginning of disconnection within myself,
Yeah.
the beginning of, and I can I can look back and see that there were other things going on that didn't just start then. Um, but I think if you're any kind of creative person, what you most need is a sense of integration,
Mm,
which is by which I mean you need to feel that your body is your own, your creative impulses are your own, and that means your your sexuality is your own, your instincts and your intuitions, more importantly, are your own. Um, there is fundamental need to have all of those things be integrated and not be at war with one another.
Mm.
Um, because I think when you have any kind of conflict in those things within yourself, it's very difficult to be able to connect intuitively and to allow in inspiration, ideas. Um,
Mm.
they will constantly butt up against something else that you're at war with within yourself. There,
I'd
there,
love to talk about that. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Rafia. Yeah, so
I
you
just,
finish that thought.
yeah, I just feel you have to have a really open conduit within yourself, and that requires
Mm.
feeling integrated.
I love the way you said that. That I'm glad I didn't interrupt you because that word conduit sounds so important. I'd love to just sort of, when you speak about that, I translate it into my language as an energy healer, and I tend to think visually, but what I see when you say that, and it's so beautifully said, right, is that what I understand from my training as an energy healer is we have this divine essence within us, or our soul, or this light, and it's creative, right? It wants to upwell and express out through our energy field and become what we're meant to bring to the world, right?
Hmm.
For you, because you have such a strong storyteller and artist archetype, it's about this creative inspiration that needs to create something to be shared, right?
Yeah.
But this is the very process of energy healing is when that life force and that creative impulse that wants to commune and create and connect comes up through us, but it hits blockages in our energy field, old wounds, old emotions that haven't been processed, old experiences or overwhelming events, or even as strong as a trauma that's sitting there, or these ways that we've had to distort our energy field to feel like we fit in or be appropriate or respond to how we feel like our family or society needs us to be. All these messages we pick up growing up, right? It's like that creative life force that's in us comes up and it hits all these blocks and distortions, and it can't come out in a way that feels like it's really your truest expression, right?
Yeah.
So it was like maybe this place where you'd recognize there was a lot of turbulence, and your creative impulse wanted to rise up and pulse out and create something new, something bigger, something truer with your bigger expression for who you're becoming at the age of 50. But it hit some turbulence on the way out, and that's what we spent 6 months really sitting in and just seeing how to transform and process that. Does that sound
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you, because when you met me, I had 10 years before. Of course, I'm always evolving
Long
too.
time.
Yeah, was it? Oh my goodness, isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I love it. 10 or 12. But so back then I was probably only trained as an energy healer. I've been to the Barbara Brennan School of Healing for 4 years, learned to work in 4 different dimensions of the energy field. But since then, my own path had, my own life force kept pulsing out and creating and getting drawn to things, and started to specialize in trauma healing, which really means your experience of it, right? It just means that now when I sit with clients, it's a lot of, as you're sharing with me what you're struggling with, we sit across from one another and I slow you down and invite you to drop into your body, or what we think of as somatically, working somatically, trained in somatic experiencing. What was that process like for you to have that invitation? Because you're a very articulate person, so you're very capable of expressing, and sometimes I have to interrupt and be like, okay, yes, but let's drop into the body, Rafia. But what was it like to have that invitation to meet what was stirring for you down in the level of physical sensation?
It was like acknowledgement.
Mm.
I think that part of the wound as we were working together on it had to do with um, my own matrilineage and uh, what we all often talk about as the mother wound.
Mm.
And I think that one of the things that had been transferred to me was uh, a disconnection. Um, and it's interesting because I think when you use that word trauma,
Mm.
we all automatically think of something that's really dramatic, that's really, um, I think of it as big T trauma.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there are all kinds of, you know, minor things, seemingly minor things that happen in your life to you as you're growing
Mm.
up that register as trauma in the body because, and this is the definition that I have come across and really appreciate, is that trauma is really something that you experience in the absence of an empathetic witness.
Mm.
So that you're going through something that might be very emotional, very difficult, but if you don't have anybody there to acknowledge that that's happening, to say, yeah, I know this must be very difficult for you,
Mm.
you experience it as something you have to somehow deny.
Mm.
And it's on that internal level of denying that anything bad in your feeling that felt bad happened to you.
I
Begins this
love the way you're describing this. Yeah.
begins this process whereby you stop being able to feel things.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
over intellectualize. And I remember you would, in our sessions, you would constantly say, okay, drop into your body, don't over intellectualize,
All my
drop into
clients
your
hear that
body.
a lot.
And
Yeah.
like that's definitely something that I witnessed in my family is
Mm.
trying to erase it by, rationalizing it in some way, without acknowledging that there was something felt. Um,
Yeah. I love the way you're describing this because it's like you're using your language and then my healer's language for that is really I could say one of the primary things that I help people with, right, is what you're talking about is when these things that happen to us that feel wounding, maybe they're emotionally overwhelming, we have to stop the flow of our life force energy, right? Because it's too much
yeah,
to feel or to process or too scary or the feelings are too big, we're too angry, or we just don't have the support or, the fancy word I use for that is the accompaniment, a
yeah,
kind person there to hold space that gives you the space to just allow that life force
yeah,
to flow and move and express and go through what it needs to so it keeps moving. And this is the process through our whole life where little parts of our life force get blocked off and blocked off and blocked off and then blocked off in patterned ways, right? That we sort of keep getting these consistent messages of not this way, not that way.
mhm,
And yeah, the fancy word we use for that in healing is these become frozen energy blocks in our body are frozen psychic because it's emotions, experiences, thoughts. It's the whole flow of life force energy. So frozen psychic time gets
mhm,
frozen at the age we were at, age 5, 7, 2, birth, 14. Conglomerate, meaning then something difficult happens, say at our birth, and it creates a certain experience. And then anything else that feels similar connected by theme, like a theme of abandonment or a theme of rejection or a theme of betrayal, they all get grouped together in the energy field. And then sometimes then, say at age 50, a big energy moves through that's like, hey, it's time to open up and bring forth more of your potential. Suddenly, a whole conglomerate of that can get really triggered and start to break open. But it's overwhelming unless we can sort of compassionately go back and attend to those moments one moment at a time, which is a lot of really what I support you to do. When we drop into the body, we find where it's living. And then I support you to journey back this process called time travel empathy to then go be the compassionate presence for what those parts needed. Yeah.
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 And I
And
think that's an important point to make is that a lot of what happens to us, thinking about my situation as a 22-year-old now, I I'm removed from what it felt like. I'm removed from that earlier self who didn't have the 30 years of experience, um, the sense of myself separate from uh, family, because I think that it takes time to fully individuate as an adult
Mhm.
in a to a place where you really trust your own judgment about things. You really start to um, reevaluate some of what you've been taught. You're exposed to different people and different ways of being, and that causes reevaluation of
Mhm.
everything.
Mhm.
So looking back at my situation as a young person, I see that I was far more influenced by things that um, now I'm not. Now I can look at them more objectively and say to
Mm.
myself, okay, well, yeah, that doesn't jive with me, and I'm not holding on to that anymore,
Love it.
which is important.
Yeah. So that's where the journey starts, right? It starts with the cookie cart getting upset or something, something coming up that's like, whoa, something big's happening here, dropping into the body and starting to meet these places where you've had to stop the flow of your own energy. And then, of course, what we started to discover is as you begin to touch into these places where there's wounds or challenges or emotional blocks or just things that haven't been given really the love and the attending they need to, we started to see this theme coming up that was very much connected to, in particular, your lineage through your mother, the women in your lineage. And this is where we started to step into the deeper, the next layer deeper, right? Not
Mhm.
just what's happened personally in your life that you maybe haven't had a chance to digest or that's been frozen in time, but is now starting to get reawakened and needing some help to unpack. But
Yep.
this deeper layer of like, whoa, what have the women in my family been carrying? And where is that actually showing up as what I carry? And how is that? Because I don't think we'd done family constellations work before, had we? And
No,
suddenly
we
we
had.
were stepping into the energy of your family system and really looking at, whoa, what's the bigger picture here? What's been flowing down? What's been carried that
Yeah.
you're carrying? What was
Yeah.
that process like for you?
It was extremely illuminating.
Mm.
Um, I mean, this whole process has been illuminating, but I think when you break it down into its constituent parts relationally, within your family, but then one of the things that I found very enlightening was uh, constellating parts of yourself.
Mm.
Um,
Do you remember some of the particular parts of self that we brought in? I'm remembering
I
this.
think that I remember a point where um, we we kind of constellated. And I wish I could remember the terms we gave, but it
I just
was
remember a pair of red shoes, which were
uh,
representing one aspect of you.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was sort of like the
The feistier part.
feistier part versus the safer part, and the
Mhm.
part that was more like my mother, because I was very attached to my mother.
Mhm.
And I think that we often fall into these patterns where we want to please a parent, we we want them to approve of us, and in so doing, we are sending a message to ourself that parts of us that are innate are somehow inherently unwanted or inappropriate in some way. And we don't allow our fullest expression. So having that sort of concretized, broken down uh, constellations work around those different parts of the self was just very illuminating. It was bringing to the forefront this sense of, well, who do you want to be going forward? Who do you feel yourself to be going forward? And that to me was very important in terms of, okay, this is what I have to leave behind. I know
Mm,
I know where my wounds are, and I know where my sensitivities are with respect to certain things, and I want to leave that behind.
yeah.
I want to
This
go
is,
forward.
yeah. This is the place where the courage comes in, right? Because it's one thing to see it and to feel, ah, that's maybe where the self-betrayal was, or the self-abandonment, or the just places that got frozen. It's like, but what I found so beautiful about your courage as we were going is I don't think it's easy to have a calling as an artist in this life. And we talked a lot about the archetype of the starving artist, right? Or the nourished artist, which is the opposite shadow light side, right? Is so many people who get called into this artist storyteller archetype, we get a lot of messages that there's no possible way you could ever survive or make your way in the world that way, right? And how does one become a nourished artist where we trust that if I really let this true part of my soul that really wants to blossom now, it's like, oh, that's the part that's true. And all these other parts I have to bravely let go of. Like the trust that's like, okay, I'm really letting this part come to life. And I have to trust that somehow this is going to lead me into more fullness in life, into more satisfaction. And so that part of us that just needs to be physically sustained too.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because for a while when I started uh, pulling tarot as a means to sort of reconnect to an intuitive sense of self in the day to day, I I kept pulling the Fool card, and the Fool is sort of that the beginning of the journey. And the image of the Fool is just stepping out and trusting that there'll be something there to catch you. Um, and that aspect of feeling as nourished as I need to be and feeling that the resources are there is still something I'm working on. Um, and at the same time, I kind of come back to this sense that I've had through this process where all I have to do is take the next step. All I have to do is do the thing that I'm being called internally to do.
Mm.
All I have to do is listen to those whispers, because over the last, well, nearly 2 years, um, it's been a little over a year since I left my last kind of full-time employment. Um, that's how everything has unfolded. It's really been being open and, you know, intuition is really listening to yourself. And we live in a world that over time can make that very difficult.
You're speaking about something so important here, Rafia, and that's why I'm applauding you for your courage because you're like, oh, just take the next step. And I'll come back around to this too when we talk about moving into life purpose work, where our work moved by the end of 6 months. But because I teach this to people all the time, right? Is that once you start to come into alignment, you're not going to be shown point Z or
No.
Y or X. You're standing at A and you're going to be shown B, and you don't get shown C until you step to B. But it takes tremendous courage and starting to be like, okay, well, I'm just going to follow that impulse and give it a yes. Because if you don't, you kind of stop up the whole creative flow. And it
Yeah.
takes courage. And it's a whole different way of leading our life really from soul rather than intellectual
Yeah.
in a rational place. It says, I'm just going to figure it out from here. So we start to unblock the soul's light and it starts to speak. But then we have to find the courage to be like, oh, I'm going to move in this way now and trust that this is going to unfold the path.
And it's anathema to the culture. It's
Mhm.
anathema to all of the messages we get in culture
Ah,
where
completely.
we're told create a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan.
Yeah.
Um, you know, we turn a calling and a purpose into um, a really goal-oriented venture. And maybe that works for some things. maybe that works for some professions or some, uh, you know, lifestyles. But I think a creative lifestyle is so idiosyncratic by its very nature. It's very particular to the individual. And the more I focus, the more I see that you really, the only thing you need are your intuition and whatever gifts you've been given as a creator, whether you're a painter, you're a writer. Those are the only two things that you need. And your intuition is really crucial because that's the thing that's going to lead you to that next step. And then once you complete that, the step after that.
You're
And
talking about moving into a soul-led life, and it's not an easy thing. And for sure, if you have an archetype of a manager or a accountant, then maybe you're relying more on the rational and the structural, and that's your gift that you bring to the world is the structure, right? But artists have a very special calling. You know, what my spiritual teacher told me is that it's really as an artist, you know, you talk about being a conduit. You are a conduit for how divine wants to speak into the world. And um, you have to let it speak through you. And when you don't, this is where the chaos, the turbulence, the drama, or this archetype we have of the alcoholic artist, you know, or the artist who gets off the rails, right? It's because it's actually a very sacred calling. And it's yeah, it's like really to bring it forth, you have to move into a soul-led life.
yeah,
Yeah. So I want to talk because I want to get to the life purpose stuff, but I just want to wrap up that piece because here's what I noticed when we moved to the level of including your family system and generational trauma and what was living through many generations of the women behind your mother, right? Of course, there's the place of working out what are the wounds they've carried, what are the parts of them that have never been seen, where were the places where they didn't have the freedom or the support or the space, or they were trapped in a cultural expectation that didn't allow them certain freedoms. But what seemed to happen as we worked out generation after generation or situation or dynamic after dynamic, because we stepped into your family system doing what's called family constellations work probably 5 or 6 times, but it felt like what started to come through for you was the nourishment, right? When we work out the burdens of the ancestors, we start to receive the blessings of like, what is this deeper feminine charism, this deeper feminine aliveness that's been coming down through the lineage that also maybe got blocked up. It felt like it started to flow. And I don't know if you're comfortable talking about it, Rafi, but that one particular session that just blew my socks off, where we literally tracked the lineage right back to kind of its sacred origin point in the very old ancestors who were still very connected to the old ancestral ways. And you were able to connect up with a guide on that lineage, and that seemed to start to move the process into like really more of a sense of what your calling is in terms of a storyteller. That was my
yeah,
sense. Yeah.
yeah. And it really felt like, it really felt like understanding that the the messages, the information, anything I needed was really right there all along. Um, that the only thing that was missing was knowing how to ask and knowing who to direct that questioning to. Because uh, you had essentially given me some homework to try to trace my matrilineage as far back as I could conceivably think to a point in time when the women had the sort of agency and choice that they may not have had or that they may have lost or had and lost in over the course of generations. And it took me back to all the way to essentially the ancient Scythians, which is where the whole concept of the Amazon came from. because the
Mm.
women of that civilization or those civilizations, those tribal groups, they fought, they hunted, they they had, that they were obviously mothers. They were able to embody all of these different characteristics, and within their own tribal groups, it had no bearing on how they were treated or um, how anybody looked at them. They weren't seen as being less feminine or being overly masculine. It was seemingly accepted that they could do all of these different things
Mm.
in service to their tribe, in service to the collective and their group.
So you started to find the archetype or even the real connection of the wholeness that you were looking for, yeah? And this is this beautiful thing that I feel when I get to work with people's family systems, I feel this happens almost with everyone I work with, right? It's then part of your life purpose. What becomes obvious is that you are the one who's being called to call back through the doorway of the lineage that which has been left behind or lost because of generations of struggle, disruption, trauma, cultural repression. It's like that pure essence of the blessings. You're the doorway that's like, I'm bringing this back forward into this time. What does that feel like and look like as I become the face of my ancestral lineage, but also my unique self? That make sense?
Absolutely. And it connects to me to that sense of requiring courage.
Mm.
It connects to me to, the times when I felt the most stagnant. It's when I felt that I need to do something that's a little bit bold, a
Mm.
little bit courageous. And I feel that sense of those women of my lineage and what it was that they needed to go forward. They were living in a very harsh uh, environment. And I think living in that kind of an environment requires not being meek about what you're doing. You
Mm.
need to be very definitive and decisive. And um, in in the absence of, any of the kinds of conveniences that we take for granted now,
Mm.
what people of that era had was their intuition.
Mm.
They had their connection to the land and their intuitive connection to everything that surrounded them.
Mm.
And to me, that, again, that very powerfully brings me back to that the essence of what it means to be a creative person in this world, being able to connect to that intuitive sense of, well, what comes next? What
Mm.
must I do now?
Right. Yeah. As you speak about it, I'm just really resonant. I'm just feeling like almost like this. What is it? It's like a powerful opening in the core of my body and my heart. And I'm actually almost moved to tears, Rafi, because I want to say clearly your ancestors did a marvelous job because here you are. You made it, you know? This lineage has persisted to this point where here you are and carrying on, carrying on the energy of your ancestors, letting the creative energy continue to unfold. I, I'm wondering, Rafia, one thing that I was so moved by too, you would come back into your healing sessions and tell me what you'd done in the 2 weeks between when we'd worked. And I remember I can't remember if you had started your morning kind of ritual process at your altar, if that was something that you had already been doing, or if that was really something that just sort of awakened in this whole process. Because I just found the morning ritual you were doing with yourself, the way of ritualizing your connection with yourself and the ancestors and the gifts and the soul opening, really beautiful. Excuse me.
Yeah, I think I had begun it um, before we started or around the same time that we started working together. And then when we made the connection to my ancestor in session, then it just felt natural to kind of bring her into that process so that it was like I'm connecting to my intuitive sense of myself, but also my connection through lineage. Um,
It became a morning practice of how you would connect in but to guidance, but really your own
yeah,
soul or your own essence or your own
yeah,
inspiration. Yeah.
yeah, and sort of very, to me, very powerfully um, demonstrating my gratitude and um, my feeling that, you know, what I'm doing isn't solely about myself. It's in service to something that's a bit broader,
Mm.
that is meant to contribute back to spirit in some way.
Mm.
You know,
Beautiful.
when I speak about being a conduit, I think that in a lot of ways, as humans, we are all conduits on this earth. We all have something we are bringing forward through via our own physical being. And that's why, to me, the integration of the energetic and the physical is so important.
Mm. Soul, we're a soul coming through a body, and the body is the vehicle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So the arc of our work, my sense of it, right, is as we were excavating these wounds and keep excavating deeper, but also as they transform, right? More and more of your soul, your inspiration, your clarity, your bigger story of what this is all about starts to come forward. And then by the time we had worked together for 6 months, we just started to move into what I love to have be the next step for people when I sense the time is right, right? Where it becomes a little less about focusing on what's painful, what's difficult, what's overwhelming, what's the chaos, what's the emotional pain, right? Because we've done a lot of clearing that out. And it starts to be like you get a little more space and all the energies have been transformed. There's this almost like this upwelling of like, right now, what? Let's focus on life purpose. It's like, okay, there's some space now to be like, where am I going? What is going to be the more true expression of what I'm really here to do? And the way I usually do that with people is, in some sense, as a healer, doing all this clearing work of emotions and energy flows that have gotten stopped up in our childhood, and then where those energies have gotten stopped up in our family system and our lineages, and this all starts to unpack and open. That's all happening in the auric field. It's happening in the aura. This is where all of this is moving and expressing and blocked in our chakras or da 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 da. But then there's this deeper energetic level I'm trained on called the hara, or the hara dimension, or the level of our intentionality. And it's our direct alignment with our life purpose. And it's a dimension of intention. And I think just as we were finishing up 6 months of work together, Rafia, I'm pretty sure I did a few hara healings with you, this very specific alignment healing. And we started to sit and practice dropping into your alignment with your hara. Yes? And
Yes.
then, yeah, so then what was that like for you as we started to kind of include this deeper piece?
I think at first I, it sort of came slowly into our practice. And then um, I certainly felt when we did, I know there were sessions where you did direct healings on me, and I could feel that there was a shift that happened when those healings occurred. And then you sent me a recording of the practice. And when I started doing it on my own, um, was when I started to really feel shifts happening in a very profound way. Um, and at first, it was as if it brought out a lot of things that were still latent. So, a lot of emotions, a lot of mostly emotions.
Yeah, yeah, I remember you writing me emails going, help. It's like, it's okay, Rafia. When you get into that deeper level, it still moves a lot of deep, deep blocks on the auric level. Yeah, not so easy, right? When we think, well, I'm supposed to be getting on to my life purpose. Why am I like weeping more?
Yeah, and it was really like
Yeah.
some of the deepest
Mm.
emotional, like, bawling sessions that I've had.
Mm.
And I had spent the bulk of the previous year and a half essentially bawling my eyes out every single day. So to feel that there's still more,
Yeah.
Just kind of like,
Yeah.
okay, I guess there's more to this. And in a strange way, it was a motivation, it was a motivator to keep going with it because it was like, okay, well, if this is coming out of this, like, what's the end of it, right? If I keep going,
Right.
there's no way I'm just going to keep bawling my eyes out every time I do it.
Right. You had a sense you were
Something's,
clearing through
yeah,
something.
something's
Yeah.
moving, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like you know that being emotional about something means it's moving in you. It's not stagnant. All of a sudden, floodgates open and it comes out. And it felt too
Mm.
like the more I did it, and I at some point committed to doing it every day for a time, every day was different. It was very much like yoga in that sense. You know, when you
Mm.
do yoga on a daily basis, your body is different every day. It's not like I mean, you're going to feel that you're getting stronger in certain ways, but some days you're going to show up and your body is going to say, F you.
Bleh. Yeah.
And you just have to kind of deal with where you are in that day, in that moment.
Mhm.
And that,
Which is the true nature of a spiritual practice, really, and the discipline, it's so hard to be disciplined. I struggle with it myself, but it does, for me, it's that contrast to our instant gratification culture that tells people, in order to motivate us to buy, that we can have something instantly. But this is not the lifelong historical human tradition of spiritual practice. Spiritual practice is a daily discipline that you just keep doing. And that
and
is what transforms you over time. Mhm.
and sadly, we've come to think of discipline as being something punitive. We don't
Right.
think of it as,
Delicious.
well, and it's showing up for yourself every day.
Ah.
It's it's sitting with yourself and saying, what do you need today?
Mm.
And uh and being receptive to what it is you need in that day. Because I think that for me, that was the key as I did the Hara practice on the daily, was that I started to actually feel, you know, questions arising. It was like I was gaining access to a different level, not just within myself, but whatever was coming through me was coming from somewhere. And so I started to kind of ask questions like, I had moments where I was so emotional and it just felt like, is this really all mine? And I would ask those questions and I would kind of get answers back of, well, some of it is, and some of it is just, you're clearing out on behalf of your ancestors and they're just using you right now. And
Mhm.
and and then also I would kind of feel very vulnerable in those moments and I would get these messages that no, you are held. I
Mhm.
think some of the most profound moments that I had doing the Hara practice, especially when I felt um, it was an issue with the Dantian uh,
Mm. It's the
initially.
point, yes, it
Yeah,
sits in
so you
the
kind of bring
pelvis. Yeah.
yourself up, right? That's sort of
Mhm.
where the practice starts. And when I felt that, it was like all of that wounding of, do I belong here? And do I have a place here? And,
Mhm.
you know, like questioning my purpose, my being brought to earth,
Mhm.
uh, having the message of you are held. You are
Mhm.
held here. You do have a place here. It was very powerful
Wow.
and it was very healing for me. And then
Love this.
feeling that of that, sense of emotionality coming out as I was hitting the soul
Soul
seat
seed. Yes, this point in the chest. Yeah. Hmm.
of longing, of wanting to kind of bring those things together. It was in a lot of ways a corollary of the sort of previous experience of bringing together the sort of creative sexual parts with the intuitive parts as a creator, as a creative person, needing to be able to own your own physical self
Mm.
and feel confident in the choices you make and the decisions you make.
Which is very Dantian. Yes. Mm. grounding.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so it really just felt like it's a corollary, it's almost like an imprint of that, and it's just going on a much deeper level. You know, you work through the layers of your field and you get finally down to the
Yeah.
core of
Yeah, and the one thing I find when I teach students to tune into their Hara dimension, this direct alignment with their life purpose and start to work there is on the one hand, there's no emotions on the Haric level, and yet on the one other hand, it expedites the process because you're going underneath and it's like a lot of our big issues that may still not have been moved start to move on the auric level. Yeah. But question for you, Rafia, because it's something I think my students would really like to hear, right? Because I teach the Hara alignment work in a 6-week course called Luminous Life Purpose Alignment. And I think one of the biggest things that the students in the course struggle with is somehow finding that motivation or finding that opening to practice. Because I give them lots of guided recordings like I gave to you to follow along with, videos, but it's just that place where it can just be hard to somehow allow the opening into that moment to do the practice. And was there something that you found helped you, motivated you, or helped you kind of like move past any resistance or avoidance to actually try it out and practice it?
I think whatever your goal is, and for me, it was to really feel like I was working through any of the blockages that kept me from expressing myself and expressing my purpose and being being capable of focusing. Um, and I'm saying this as somebody who's still working through this, but the minute you have that as your motivation, you become willing to do what it takes to get there. And for me, I think it was that. It was the feeling of, I know I still have all of these things that I'm working through, and I really want to get through them so that they don't impede me. I want to get to the fullest expression of what my purpose is. I feel it. And I also feel that there are these things that are, you know, these hooks that are still kind of holding me back. And I want to clear those out. And I know that the most powerful way to do that is by showing up for myself every day and doing this work.
Um, I love how really what you're saying is this is the dimension of intentionality. Hara holds our intention. And you were saying, I brought a strong intention into my intention to connect with my intention. You know, it was like there was a really strong intention for what you were longing for, right? What you're longing to open into. You know, I feel like a little thought too, and maybe I'm sort of answering the question myself, but as I think back over your journey, I also think that the 6 months previous of clearing work helps a lot because I think it can be hard to just focus on this sort of like discipline of getting this energy alignment when we're pulled by a lot of still emotional pain, stress, just a lot of that stuff still living in our field. It can feel like that needs the attention. We need the care and the TLC and the accompaniment sometimes for those things that are really awake before we can get super serious and disciplined. For some people that I work with, I think that's more they're at the step before and maybe not quite ready for this strong work. So
Yeah, I think you have to definitely do some kind of preparation or go through some things
mm,
before you can be fully receptive. And, you know, we've talked about this, that even reconnecting with you was a matter of uh, realizing that there was something that had been left undone
mm,
from the previous uh, point that we had worked together. Um, and realizing that, oh, that makes a lot of sense, this thing that was left undone.
Mm.
This is the thing, the very thing that I feel I need to focus on now. And that was sort of the entry point to everything that we did in that 6 months, um, for me.
Yeah. Sometimes our crises are our greatest blessings if we open the doorway and step in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Last thing I want to ask you, Rafia, is because I feel like you were sharing a lot of stories with me about the kinds of things that unfold. I think it was happening maybe at a slower pace as we were doing the clearing work, but most of the time when people start to connect with Hara and this life purpose alignment work, lots of synchronicities or guidance or um, signposts start to show up on your path. And I don't, were you experiencing that in terms of like feeling like point B and C and D and E starting to show up for you?
Yeah. So I had, and for me, because I live in a city that is in some ways somewhat isolated from the industry that I'm seeking to join, the community that I'm seeking to join. Not that there aren't writing communities here, but
Not many publishers, though.
not many publishers know this isn't really the seat of
Mm.
Canadian publishing. So my only outlet was to get onto social media and try to find community through that venue. And so, um, as it happens, Substack seems to be a very uh, busy outlet for writers, and publishers.
Mm.
And I had connected, it's a bit of a longer story, but I had come across in my social media accounts, um, this poet, and she would post poetry and different things. But on Substack, she had a bit more of a prominent presence. And uh, out of the blue, uh, she posted that there were places in a poetry seminar for the month of April, and I had never heard of the individual whose work we were going to be talking about, but it was like there was a voice saying, do this. So I signed up and had an incredible experience in a community of people who were all interested in poetry and all interested in writing. Um, and it, as it turned out, this poet had started a group, a writing group.
Oh, cool.
Um, so, it sort of like in my consciousness and then having this positive experience, I was like, I'm going to join up with them. I think this will be very good. And so I've been a member of this group for the last couple of months and doing it on a continuing basis.
So the stepping stones started to appear. Yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah. Yeah.
around the same time, I had been um, somewhat haphazardly submitting to different literary journals and, not getting accepted, which is par for the course. Um, but I had also applied for a writer's workshop that was specifically aimed at people who, hadn't published or who, you know, weren't really active, but wanted to work on their work. And I, me being a member of this writing community, and then the opportunity came up to join with this workshop. Um, and it's run by a very kind of prestigious journal, literary journal. So, that was like it was like these little glimmers coming through of the need for community, and then finding community, and then the need for an experience that lets you know you're on the path and having that experience. And so the whole past year of my life has been an education in you take one step and the next step appears. You take that step and then the next one appears, and learning how to trust that as part of the process. Um, and it feels like the work that we've done has been very integral in terms of every time you have a moment of doubt, you kind of go back to that work. You try to refocus your energies and refocus on your intention um, and doubt and all of those emotions are very kind of energetically foggy. They
Mhm.
they tend
Mhm.
to skew things and make you feel like you can't see. And those are the moments where you really need to just kind of take a breath and ground yourself and really try to just push that away.
Right.
And Hara practice really helps in terms of doing that, I find.
Mm. So what's next on your path? What's the next stepping stone? Are you waiting for it to appear? Are you standing
I'm
on one and looking?
yeah, I'm in the point of waiting for it to appear. I I'm waiting to find out if I've been accepted to a master's program. Um, so just essentially waiting for that. And if that doesn't uh, materialize, then it's something else. Um, I've learned over the last while that if something doesn't, you know, come about, then you're being directed somewhere else. That's that's really what it is. It's um that's I don't know, it's learning to trust.
Last thought I want to bounce off of you is just, as we've spoken, what I'm talking about a lot in the healing room, which is the sort of newsletter blog that I put out a couple times a month, is, I talk about how each of us needs a healing room because it's our wounds are the ground of our initiation into life. And as we've spoken, Rafia, I just hear so much this. I mean, the courage that it takes, but it's like to listen to the stirring of our soul, and that it's really about going. Even the healing of our deepest wounds is this path of initiation of opening up more and more of our light, which in your path has been also about connection to the ancestors and drawing that through into guidance. But this really is the human journey, and it's just not as rational, linear, or purchasable as capitalist culture would have us think. And yeah, it just strikes me this nature of this deeper initiation into ourselves and our purpose that we can step into if we have the courage, if we're willing to kind of reconnect with that unfolding.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Well, it's been amazing talking with you. And we're going to do a Hara healing after this. So maybe that'll be the next, well, not right after this interview, but soon. Maybe that'll be the next nudge to just sort of congeal things and see what the next stepping stone is. But such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Rafia, for sharing your deep process with us. And thank you for your courage as an artist. It's I just was so compelled by, as you speak, I feel the beauty of that bringing the words through the vessel of a human body and soul. And in this age of AI, and we think we can just write anything, just still the deep human importance of the stories that we have to tell that come through not only your life experience, but all of your ancestors, all of your culture, the birthing of what those stories are. It's very, very beautiful. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.